Bismillah Rahman Rahim. Assalamu alaikum, my dear students. Our current session focuses on aspects of linguistic communication. I hope and expect by the end of the session you would be able to understand what do we mean by aspects of linguistic communication. In fact, through the session, what I would try to do is I would like to place the linguistic component and the importance of the linguistic component in the broader social and cultural context of communication. Because, when we talk of communication, there are different aspects that are involved. The current session would focus, however, only on the linguistic aspects of this. At the outset, I think this would be a good idea just to quickly look at the word communication. What is communication and where does the word come from? Actually, the word comes from the Latin origin communicare, which means to transmit. So, mainly the purpose of communication is to transmit information, to share information, to pass information on to the other interlocutor or to the listener or to the addressee. Well, I am going to define here using a definition that I'm going to quote from Flores de Guattari. According to Flores, man, society, culture, civilization, and progress are concepts that are reciprocally validated in close proximity. But the force that causes these processes to interact for the fundamental fact of existence, just as the flow of blood gives life to physiological man, is communication. So, to him, communication is basic to human beings. And as blood runs in our veins and gives us life, in the same way, communication runs, as a thread in the whole system of communities of human beings. And thus, communication makes human existence possible. Well, I would use another definition in this regard to make further the concepts clear. According to David K. Berlaw, it is the process by which a transmitter sends a message through a channel to a receiver. Well, because we are just focusing on the linguistic communication, aspects of linguistic communication, so what we need to think at this point about is there are how many languages in the world, more than 6,000 languages are used in the world, and then how many possible varieties of syntax and semantics and orthographies and how many varieties of writing systems are available, and then how many users of each language. You can understand through all this the very complicated networking of how linguistic communication takes place. In fact, my dear students, if we go back and if we look at the historical perspective on communication and linguistic communication mainly, Aristotle was of the view the main purpose of communication, and with this he meant linguistic communication, the main purpose of communication is persuasion. To persuade. That is the attempt of the speaker to bring others to his or her point of view. So, to convince other people of your ideas. This is the purpose of using language for communication. This is an important aspect of linguistic communication according to Aristotle. On the other hand, Aranguren is of the view communication, that is again the linguistic communication by the way, is the transmission of a message by means of a sender, conduction, and a receiver. Now this is a very basic kind of a definition that talks about a sender and a receiver and a message that operates in between the two. And actually this kind of concept of communication can further then be expanded to paralinguistic and to extralinguistic aspects of communication as well. Well, my dear students, since the focus in this session is to help you understand different aspects of linguistic communication with the help of different definitions, so again on the screen you can see another definition that is by Martinet, and according to Martinet, it is the utilization of a code. So, explicitly language comes in. It is the utilization of a code for the transmission of a message about a certain experience in semiological units in order to enable human beings to relate to one another. Now, there are a couple of things that are important in this definition. The first thing is the utilization of a code, use of a language. That code, according to Martinet has pointed out, can be any kind of a linguistic code. It can be a standard language, it can be a non-standard language, it can be a dialect, it can be a sociolect, it can be a regional dialect, for example. So, that all this umbrella term code here covers all those choices. Another important aspect, my dear students, of this definition is that it is about conveying human experience. So, as we as human beings live in different communities, all through the processes of living and surviving, we go through different experiences, and all these experiences have to be contributed towards this bigger network of communication. Why? Because everybody cannot experience everything. We learn through sharing these experiences. We learn through observations, and language, according to Martinet, is a tool that is used for that purpose. Now, what are the factors that impede human communication? Sometimes not understanding the language. As I have already said, there are 6,000 languages around the globe. People speak different languages. So if you do not understand the language of the other person, or if one group does not understand the language of the other group, or one community has a language that is different from the other community, there is a linguistic barrier, then human communication would be, barred, and it would not be possible. Sometimes not understanding the context. Human beings always speak in context. They utter utterances in context. They do not use language in isolation. So, sometimes when you don't know the context, in your own life, you would have experienced it so many times. You would have seen it. You would have observed it, that people have misunderstandings. Why? Because somebody would say, "This is what you said to me." And the other person would say, "No, I did not say this." But why it would happen? Because the other person would not know the context of that. The other person would just, for example, enter a room and would catch up, from somewhere the middle of some utterance or some conversation. So, not understanding the context. This not understanding the context also involves not understanding the cultural context. For example, when you travel from one area to another in the world, you go to an unknown culture that you are not familiar with. Though you understand the language, your inability to understand the culture or the cultural context would hamper your understanding of what the other person is saying. Though you would understand the words per se, you would know the language. The third barrier is of obfuscation. And what is that? That is intentionally delivering an obscure or confusing message. In some situation, if one person does that, then there can be a barrier in communication. The fourth aspect of that is distraction. When a communication process is going on between two persons, or between two groups, or amongst more than two people, say 3 or 4 people, in that process, if there is a distraction that is caused consciously, or that is happen due to some other reasons that are beyond control, for example, then there would be a barrier. In the context of the variety of languages that are spoken in our own country, in our local and regional cultures, and the writing scripts that we use for them, if you think of all this, I hope you would be able to understand that there are certain aspects of linguistic communication that need a complete understanding for both the interlocutors in the conversation, in the social context of the conversation, or in the social context of the interaction, be it spoken or written.